Move your yacht immediately or we'll have it towed. That was the first sentence hurled at me the moment I stepped out onto my dock. Coffee still warm in my hand. Morning still clinging to the mist rising off the water. She was standing there like she owned the world's sun hat drooping over her sunglasses. Walkie-talkie clipped to her belt like she was on a military operation. Behind her, a swarm of HOA members buzzed about with clipboards, folding tables, and coolers, as if they were hosting the town's biggest fishing party right in the middle of my piece. And the thing is, they didn't even flinch. Not one of them looked confused, hesitant, or embarrassed to be setting up speakers on someone else's dock. Why would they? They'd been doing this for years. But this time, they did it on the wrong man's shore. Not the boat, not the dock, the whole lake. I owned it. Every glimmering ripple and every shadowed cove. That was the truth they didn't know. But it wasn't just about ownership. It was the audacity, the sheer gall, and the unspoken rule. If you speak loud enough, confidently enough, people might just back down, but not this time. So tell me, where were you watching from when this all started? Were you on the side of the lake, holding a fishing pole, sipping beer, thinking nothing of trespass? Were you one of those who thought the yacht was too big, too fancy, too out of place for a town like Harrison Cove? Or were you just watching the news later, wondering why a man would go to war over a body of water? Sit with that, because this didn't begin with a lawsuit. It began with silence. I'd come back home after 2 decades in tech, burned out by venture capital, office politics, and the kind of meetings where people said a lot but meant nothing. All I wanted was quiet. I bought a 10-acre property nestled against the lake I grew up near dense trees, soft mud trails, and the sweet lull of water that barely stirred unless the wind insisted. The listing had been clear. No HOA, no neighbors sharing fences, no community picnic areas, just me, the trees, and the Liberty Bell. That's what I named her, my 1978 Chris Craft yacht, fully restored after years of blood, sweat, and half my divorce settlement. She was my sanctuary, my floating redemption, and every inch of that lake was part of my deed. But like most nightmares, this one didn't arrive all at once. It leaked into my life like a cracked faucet. First, it was the teenagers parking their golf carts on my lawn while they fished. I waved, I smiled, let it go. Then it was old men dragging canoes across my dock without asking, scratching the wood I had personally sanded and sealed. Still, I said nothing. I even helped untangle someone's fishing line from a branch once. A favor, a gesture, a mistake. Because when you give inches, people start drawing miles. The Saturday that changed everything began like any other. I woke to the smell of pine and diesel and the familiar groan of Liberty Bell adjusting with the tide. But when I looked outside, I saw something that made the blood drain from my face. A full-blown setup, tents, grills, speakers, coolers, a bounce house. Someone had even strung a massive Willow Hills HOA annual fishing day banner across my trees. My trees. I walked down in slippers and a robe, half stunned, half furious. I tapped a curly-haired woman on the shoulder. She turned, looked me up and down, and smirked. "Oh," she said casually. "We were told it was okay. You're the quiet guy, right? No kids, no plans. We figured you wouldn't mind." The words hit harder than I expected. Not just the lie, the assumption that I was some background character in their summer storyline, that my silence equaled consent. She waved at another woman by the grill and shouted, "Karen, this is the lake guy." And there she came, clipboard tucked under one arm, white teeth flashing under the brim of a wide-brimmed straw hat, like she was presenting a weather segment on local TV. "Hi, Jake," she said, as if we were old friends. "This is just our yearly event. We've been doing it for decades. I'm sure you understand. It's one day." I stared at her, on my dock. She blinked like a confused golden retriever. "Well, the lake is for the community." "No," I said, flat and cold. "It's not. It's private. It belongs to me." Her smile twitched, then died. "Well, she said, clearing her throat. This isn't going to work. Our families have always used this lake. We'll talk to the city about public access rights. You might be confused about the boundaries. Then she handed me a map childishly drawn, vague, and laughably inaccurate. She pointed to a shaded blob and said, "See shared shoreline." I looked at her and said, "Karen, pack up. You need to leave. Today." She turned on her heel and shouted to the crowd, "Wrap it up for now. We'll handle this." That was their warning shot. And mine came the week after. I went to the county office. I pulled every document, every deed, every water rights transfer going back to the 50s. I found what I needed: solid, dusty proof that the lake wasn't just mine by accident. It was mine by name, by blood, by record. The original sale in 1958 gave full ownership to the property line, no public access, no easements, no clauses. The HOA's own bylaws excluded the lake entirely. It wasn't theirs. It never was. So when they came back the next Saturday with more people, more tents, more smug confidence, I didn't say a word. I let them dance, let them fish, let them pop open coolers like they were on vacation. Then I walked down, climbed aboard Liberty Bell, and raised my voice. This is your final warning. You're trespassing. Leave now or I shut everything down. Karen, now backed by a red-faced man with HOA branded polo, strutted toward me like she was entering a courtroom. We're reporting you to the sheriff. She snapped. You don't own the water. I have the deed. I said, then show it. I will in court. She pointed at Liberty Bell. Fine, then move your yacht. It's blocking the community view. I laughed. You want me to move my yacht? From my dock? On my lake? She crossed her arms. If you don't, we'll have it towed. That's when I pressed the button. The new hydraulic gate swung shut over the only public road access. The signs went up, private property, no trespassing. The dock's alarm screamed to life, buzzing, shrill, unignorable. The party fell silent. People froze mid-sentence, mid-step, mid-sip. Karen's smile broke like a windshield under a rock. But just as I began to feel the warmth of control returning to my chest, my phone buzzed. A new battlefront. A legal complaint filed with the city council claims of obstruction, emotional harm, misuse of communal resources. The lake, the dock, the yacht, me. I closed my eyes and exhaled. So it had begun. But tell me again, where were you when it started on the lawn, on the dock, behind a cooler, or behind a keyboard watching the story unfold? Because wherever you stood, no, this wasn't just a story about a lake. It was about a line drawn in water. And someone finally daring to say, you don't get to cross it just because you're loud. The email from the city council didn't surprise me. What did was how fast it came. Less than 24 hours after I shut the gates and activated the alarms, I received a subject line in all caps: urgent community complaint, recreational access denial. The words felt deliberately chosen, like they were trying to make recreation sound like a constitutional right. Attached were PDFs of complaint forms filed by various Willow Hills residents, filled with carefully curated outrage and strategically omitted truths. One accused me of aggressive shoreline militarization. Another claimed their child wept for hours after seeing a no trespassing sign. Karen's was the longest. She framed herself as a heartbroken leader trying to protect a cherished community tradition from an outsider with wealth and walls. Outsider. The word stung, even if it shouldn't have. I'd grown up in this town. I knew these woods, these roads, the sound of the frogs at night and the scent of river moss in summer. But I left for 2 decades. And when I came back, I wasn't Jake from Harrison Cove anymore. I was just the guy with the boat and the fence and the lake that everyone assumed belonged to everyone. The council scheduled a zoning review, closed door, emergency status. I showed up with a binder thicker than Karen's voice. Deeds, survey maps, water rights history, even a notarized letter from the previous owner confirming the lake's private status. I kept my tone respectful but firm. The truth didn't need volume, it needed precision. Karen arrived dressed like she was running for office pearls. Navy blazer, hair swept back like a news anchor. She spoke first. Her voice quivered in all the right places. She told stories of kids swimming, of barbecues on summer nights, of the community's spiritual connection to the water. She painted a lake filled with memory and meaning and deliberately left out the part where none of it was ever hers. I waited. When it was my turn, I didn't match her emotion. I matched her facts. And then I passed out copies of the original Lake Covenant, stamped 1958, outlining every foot of shoreline and ownership, my shoreline. The room fell quiet. One of the councilmen, Greg Holloway, squinted at the document and muttered, "Well, this changes things." Karen tried to pivot, but it's always been open. She insisted, "Tradition can't be bulldozed by bureaucracy. Tradition isn't a deed." I replied. Greg nodded slowly. "He's right. The council didn't vote that day. They said they needed time to deliberate, to review documents, to consult with legal." But I saw the shift. Karen saw it too. Her expression twisted on the way out, tight lips, quick steps. A woman calculating plan B. I didn't wait for her to make the next move. I made mine. Security around the dock was doubled. I hired a part-time guard, Jeff, a retired Marine who didn't talk much but had a way of looking through people. We set up trail cameras around the tree line, upgraded the gate locks, added infrared sensors under the Liberty Bell. If they wanted to escalate, I'd be ready, but they didn't return with lawyers. They returned with sympathy signs and lawn protests. Flyers started appearing in mailboxes, cheaply printed, black and white sheets that read, "Save our lake," photos of children looking longingly at water. Quotes like, "He won't even let my son fish anymore," beneath grainy shots of Liberty Bell floating alone. One morning, I found a handmade sign nailed to a pine tree across from my driveway. "Lake greed is not a neighborhood value." I didn't respond, not to the flyers, not to the emails, not even to the woman who screamed, "Selfish coward," from a passing golf cart as I trimmed branches by the fence. But silence didn't mean surrender. I kept documenting everything. I logged every protest, every video, every incident, because I knew this wasn't over. I just didn't expect the next ambush to come with lemonade on a Sunday afternoon. While Jeff was walking the perimeter, a woman knocked on my front door, mid-30s, nervous smile, a Tupperware container in one hand. "Hi," she said. "I'm Lisa. I'm with the HOA, treasurer." I said nothing. She held up the container. "Lemon bars. I made them myself. Figured you could use something sweet." I raised an eyebrow. "Before or after you file another complaint?" She looked down, then back at me. I didn't vote for the complaint. I didn't even know Karen filed it until after. I stepped outside, but didn't invite her in. "Why are you here?" She hesitated, glanced over her shoulder like someone might be watching. "I want to talk, not as HOA, as a person. Can we walk?" I didn't trust her, but something in her eyes felt different, less polished, less strategic. We walked along the northern fence. She didn't speak at first, just walked. Then Karen's not doing this for the community. I stopped. "No kidding." Lisa laughed once. Dry. "She's working with a guy named Doug. He's trying to get the HOA to push a redevelopment plan, floating cafe, boat rentals, even mentioned a summer music festival. They want to turn the lake into a money pit. They just need you gone first." My grip on the fence post tightened. "Why tell me?" "Because I'm tired of pretending this is about picnics and paddleboards. It's about leverage, and I don't want to be part of it anymore." She handed me a flash drive. "These are their emails, Zoom call recordings, proposal drafts. Use them if you need. You're not afraid they'll come after you. They already are," she said. "They cut me out of the last meeting. Change the passwords on the HOA database." I took the flash drive. "You just changed the whole game." That night, I plugged it in, watched hours of Doug Crane pacing in front of a whiteboard, pitching numbers, branding ideas, PR strategies. One line stood out, burned into my skull. "We'll break him down. That lake's ours. He just doesn't know it yet." The next morning, I sent the footage to my lawyer. She replied in 2 minutes flat, "Let's bury them." We filed a countersuit. Defamation. Harassment. Conspiracy to seize private property, named the HOA and Doug personally. Then I leaked parts of the Zoom calls to the local press. The story flipped overnight. No more sad violins and kid faces. Now the headlines read, HOA plot to monetize private lake exposed. The HOA board went into meltdown. Karen tried to spin it, called the recordings edited. Doug disappeared for 3 days. Protest signs came down. Even the gossip Facebook page went silent. For a moment, I thought it was over, until one night, at 2:13 am, my motion sensors triggered, camera feed lit up, a figure on the dock, hooded, still, and in his hand a gas can. I didn't even hesitate. Hit the emergency button. Floodlights ignited the shoreline. The figure froze, then ran, slipped through the woods, gone. Jeff and Sheriff Dan arrived in minutes. We reviewed the footage. One frame caught his face turning toward the light. Doug, Sheriff Dan muttered. This man's lost his mind. The next day, a warrant was issued. Doug was caught trying to break into the HOA office at night, claimed he was retrieving personal files. They found burner phones, a map of my property, and a note Plan C. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was scared, because I was angry. They didn't just want to use the lake. They wanted to erase the man who stood in their way, but they underestimated the wrong quiet guy. The lake wasn't theirs to take, and I wasn't theirs to move. The first court hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday morning, 2 weeks after Doug's arrest. The judge didn't waste time. After reviewing the footage, the emails, and the HOA bylaws, he issued a temporary injunction against both Doug and the Willow Hills HOA, explicitly banning them from making contact with me, accessing the lake, or initiating any development plans until the full case was heard. Doug wasn't present. He was still in custody. Karen was, though, seated stiffly in the back of the courtroom, sunglasses on despite the indoor lighting, surrounded by a wall of silence where her usual entourage might have sat. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. The message had already been delivered. Loud, legal, and final for now. But peace, like most things that matter, didn't last. A week after the injunction, I woke up to find a folded flyer taped to my gate. This time it wasn't an attack. It was an invitation. A full-color, professionally designed event flyer for something called the Harrison Heritage Lake Festival, hosted not by the HOA, but by a shell group called Friends of Harrison Waters. The fine print was clever. The event would be held on a narrow county-owned strip of land at the lake's eastern edge, the only public sliver left untouched by private ownership. No one would step on my land. No one would violate the court order. But the water, that was another story. They were planning a festival on the edge of my lake, and they were daring me to do something about it. I called Sheriff Dan. He was sympathetic, but careful. Technically, he said, they're on public land, and if they launch boats from there but don't touch your dock or shoreline, it's a gray zone. There's no gray zone. I snapped. They're weaponizing technicalities. I know, he said, but the law doesn't move as fast as pettiness. He paused. They want a reaction out of you. Don't give it to them, but they didn't need a reaction. They had a plan. The festival came fast. Tents, booths, food trucks, a makeshift stage. Hundreds of people gathered. Some were locals. Many were unfamiliar faces from out of town. They brought kids, pets, canoes, paddleboards, even a floating DJ booth. It looked harmless, picturesque, even, until I saw the boats. One by one, they launched into the lake and drifted west toward my property. They didn't dock, didn't trespass, just floated. Clustered closer and closer to on my shoreline, to Liberty Bell, like birds circling a statue they couldn't quite land on. I stood at the edge of the dock with Jeff beside me. Technically, he muttered, they're still legal. I nodded. Legally invasive. Strategic provocation. He corrected. This is pressure. Jake, they're showing you that they can outlast you, outnumber you, out-narrate you. I didn't respond. Not then. I just watched we saw shouldn't have been I watched as the lake that once brought me peace became a silent battleground for optics and ownership. That night, I took Liberty Bell out for a full circle of the lake. Just once. Not fast, not loud, just present. A reminder, a signal. I didn't wave, I didn't smile, and I didn't break eye contact with the people floating in the moonlight. They moved slowly, gradually. They paddled away. The next morning, I found new tire tracks behind my shed, and a hose lonkish, coiled, still damp, hidden under a tarp. Someone had attempted to siphon water. I checked the surveillance feed. Static. A glitch at the exact time the tracks appeared. Not a coincidence. I reported it to the sheriff. He investigated but found no usable evidence. They're getting smarter. He admitted, whoever did this knows your system, so I upgraded it again. Thermal sensors, pressure pads, night vision drones. I hired a second guard, Ari, former park ranger, sharp-eyed and detail-obsessed. She patrolled at night, Jeff patrolled by day. I took the in-between, the lake. Once my place of solitude, now demanded constant surveillance. And I hated it. I hated what I had to become just to hold what was already mine. Then came the lawsuit, not from the HOA, from a new group called the Willow Hills Family Coalition, a nonprofit, newly incorporated, claiming to represent historical users of Harrison Lake. The suit accused me of emotional distress, cultural exclusion, and psychological harm caused by the presence of militarized barriers and aggressive watercraft. Aggressive watercraft. They meant Liberty Bell, my boat, my sanctuary. According to their complaint, its size, coloration, and positioning created an oppressive atmosphere, discouraging public joy. My lawyer nearly choked laughing. Then she got serious. They're not trying to win. They're trying to bury you in paper, exhaust you, make you settle, make you doubt. But I didn't settle. I filed a countersuit again, this time for attempted fraud, false representation, and willful misrepresentation of land rights. But the real blow came from someone I didn't expect. David Carlson, the man who sold me the property. The lake. The legacy called me out of the blue. Jake, he said, we need to talk. In person. I drove to his farmhouse that afternoon. He was already waiting on the porch with a dusty wooden box beside his chair. I found something, he said, handing it to me. Inside were old documents, not just deeds, letters, journals, notes from his grandfather. Dated back to the 1930s, they detailed the hand-dug origins of the lake, the irrigation channels, the ownership transfers. One letter in particular caught my eye. It mentioned a surveyor's error, an uncorrected misalignment between county records and property lines. This proves, David said, that the lake was never meant to be public, not 1 inch of it. Why now, I asked. Why give me this now? He looked me dead in the eye, because someone from the HOA reached out to me last week, offered money for access, said they'd rewrite history if I didn't correct it publicly. And I don't sell truth. I took the documents, scanned them, added them to my case, but even as the evidence piled up in my favor, so did the hostility. My name trended online. I received hate messages, fake reviews on my former business, even threats sent by mail. Liberty Bell was vandalized again, scratches down the hall. A can of sardines stuffed into the engine intake. Jeff found it before it caused real damage. But it was the message that mattered. We're watching. We're coming. And then, just when I thought I'd seen the worst, Lisa showed up again. This time not with lemon bars or documents. This time, her face was pale, her voice tight. You need to see this, she said, holding up her phone. It was a video, a recording from a private HOA board brunch. Doug was there, out of jail, sitting casually, surrounded by a new circle of allies, laughing. We don't need courts, he said. We just need to make him crack. Water doesn't need to be taken. It just needs to be worn down. The room laughed, and someone else chimed in. Off camera. Let's make him the villain in his own story. That was the moment I realized something I hadn't admitted before, not even to myself. This wasn't a battle for property. It was a battle for narrative. They weren't just trying to take my lake. They were trying to take the version of me that stood guard over it, reframe me, replace me, reduce me to a caricature they could fight, and I was done playing defense. That night, I wrote a letter, not to the HOA, not to the council, to the people. I published it in the local paper, word for word, under the title, Why I Fight. It wasn't angry. It wasn't bitter. It was honest. I told them about my past, my divorce, my exhaustion. I told them about Liberty Bell, about restoring her, about what peace meant to me. And I ended with a line that still echoes in my head. I didn't buy this lake to keep people out. I bought it to find myself again. And I won't lose that to anyone, loud or quiet. The next day, the paper sold out. The mail stopped coming. The threats went quiet. And 3 cars honked as they passed my gate. Not in protest, in support. Maybe they didn't all agree with me. Maybe they still wanted lake access. But they knew one thing now. I wasn't the villain. I was just the last man standing between memory and manipulation, between a real story and the one they were trying to rewrite. The first thing I noticed was the silence, not the peaceful kind I'd moved here for, but the kind that felt staged, too still, like a held breath. The lake didn't ripple that morning. No birds, no distant lawnmower. Even the wind seemed to pause. It had been 2 days since my letter ran in the paper, and the response had been eerily quiet. Not a protest, not a new flyer, not even a post on the HOA gossip board. Something in my gut told me the storm wasn't over. It was just regrouping. That evening, Jeff and Ari reported new boot prints near the far west edge of the property, the only spot we hadn't fully fenced because the terrain dipped too steep into the water. The prints stopped short of the shore, almost mocking us, like someone had walked to the edge just to prove they could. We reviewed the camera footage, but the west camera had glitched again, same as last time. Same pattern static lines for exactly 5 minutes. Then perfect clarity, a signature. Jeff's expression hardened. They're testing your perimeter. He said, not for access, for your patience. The next night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the upstairs window with a pair of binoculars, eyes fixed on the water. At 2:43 a.m., it happened. A boat small, metallic, no lights. No sound appeared from the southern fog and drifted toward the center of the lake. It stopped. No paddling, no engine, just floating, watching. I turned the floodlights on. The boat didn't move. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out to the dock. Heart racing, blood cold. Jeff met me halfway. We've got visual. I whispered, south center, still. No movement. He lifted his own binoculars and adjusted the focus. One figure, hooded, can't see the face. They're not drifting. I said, they're anchored. We activated the drone. Within a minute, it hovered above the lake. Scanning with night vision, the figure looked up. For 1 second, the face was visible. It wasn't Doug. It wasn't anyone I recognized. Young, maybe late 20s, pale, expressionless, unbothered by the light or the surveillance. Then the boat shifted, slowly turned, and without sound or splash, it disappeared into the fog. We sent the drone after it, but within 200 feet, the feed dropped black screen, signal loss. Jeff looked at me. This is not HOA anymore. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat had closed. Something about the figure felt wrong, not just threatening, detached, inhuman. The next morning, I received a package, no return address. Inside, a single photo, grainy, black and white, taken from the center of the lake, pointed directly at my house, written on the back. In perfect typeface, he wasn't the only one who watched. I handed it to the sheriff immediately. Dan furrowed his brow, turning the photo over in his weathered hands. We'll escalate the investigation, he said. This isn't community drama anymore. This is premeditation, harassment at a federal level. Maybe. Can you trace the photo, I asked. See where it was printed. We'll try, he said, but his tone was heavy. You should be prepared. Jake, it may not stop with legal boundaries. That night, Lisa came by again, visibly shaken. "There's something I never told you," she said, voice tight. Back when Doug was still on the board, he mentioned a Plan D. He never explained it in front of everyone, just said if the legal stuff failed. There were people who didn't care about paperwork. He was always vague. But I remember once he said something like, "The lake attracts obsessives." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Obsessives, people who fixate, who believe places have power, that water remembers things, that they're part of something sacred." I stared at her, unsure if she was exaggerating or breaking into truth I hadn't considered. "You think he brought someone like that into this?" "I think he found someone who already believed it." The days that followed blurred into high alert. The guards rotated in shifts. We installed underwater sensors, extended the fence to the steep west dip using a suspended net system, and reinforced the drone feed with backup servers. Every night, I watched, and almost every night, I saw movement shadows on the water, lights flickering in the trees, and on one occasion, a piece of driftwood floating against the tide with something tied to it, a stone carving of a face. Crude, primitive, eyes hollowed out. Ari retrieved it with gloves, placed it in a bag, and looked at me like we had crossed into something darker than property law. "This is folklore stuff," she said, symbolic, like a warning or a curse. I wanted to laugh. I couldn't, because part of me believed her. The lake didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt possessed by fear, by conflict, by something older and stranger that had been woken up by our war. And then came the fire. Not a blaze, not something dramatic. Just the smell of gasoline near the east perimeter, where someone had soaked the soil but hadn't lit it, as if they wanted us to find it, as if the threat was the point. I found a matchbox nearby. On the inside cover, a single word stamped in red ink. Enough. Sheriff Dan took it seriously this time. Called in state investigators. Increased patrols. But the damage wasn't physical. It was psychological. Every creak of wood became a warning. Every gust of wind sounded like a whisper. I began to dream in water of being pulled under, of hands grabbing my ankles, of Liberty Bell sinking slowly as unseen figures watched from the trees. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take another week of this, it stopped. No boats, no figures, no notes, nothing. 3 days, 4, a week, silence. And I didn't trust it. I stayed alert. But the pressure lifted, the lake stilled, and people started returning, friendly ones. A retired couple left a pie on my gate. A boy and his father waved from their canoe on the public side. No signs, no slogans, just people. Lisa stopped by with wine. We sat on the dock, the lake stretching wide and quiet. "Do you think it's over?" she asked. I didn't answer. Instead, I asked, "Do you regret getting involved?" She shook her head. "No, I regret staying silent so long." I nodded slowly. "Me too. Silence is what gave them room to grow." She leaned back, looking out over the water. "You think they'll come back? The lake is valuable." I said, "And anything valuable attracts shadows." She was quiet a long time. Then she asked, "Would you ever leave?" "No." I said, "If I leave, they win." And I didn't rebuild this place to run. That night, for the first time in months, I fell asleep without checking the cameras, and that's when it happened. At 3:13 a.m., the alarm triggered, motion near the dock. I sat bolt upright, checked the feed, a figure again, hooded, motionless. But something was different. He wasn't alone. A second figure stood 10 feet behind him, then a third, all silent, all facing the house. I hit the panic button. Lights exploded across the shoreline. The figures didn't flinch. They turned, one by one, and vanished into the fog like ghosts. When the sheriff arrived, all that was left were wet footprints on the dock, 3 sets, identical size, identical stride. Jeff said nothing, just stared at the lake like it had betrayed him. Ari whispered, "That wasn't random. That was a message." And I believed her, because when I checked the footage, one frame caught all 3 faces, just a glimpse, and every one of them was smiling, not out of joy, but certainty. They didn't want to take the lake. They wanted me to surrender it. and that, I knew, would never happen. The next morning, I found a dead fish nailed to my dock, not thrown, not left to rot, nailed, precisely centered, head facing the house, a deliberate symbol. I didn't flinch. I didn't call the sheriff. I removed it myself, quietly, and burned it in the fire pit behind the house. Whoever left it wasn't trying to destroy property. They were trying to hollow something out from the inside. My resolve, my patience, my sense of safety. But the thing about being under siege for long enough is that you stop waiting to feel safe. You start learning how to live inside the tension I had. And if they wanted me rattled, they'd have to try harder. That week passed without another sign. No more hooded figures, no boats, no static. Lisa continued to visit. We didn't talk about the lake. We cooked together, drank in silence, laughed at things that weren't funny, just necessary. Some nights, Jeff would join us. Ari, too. We began to feel like a strange little garrison, defending something that no longer needed defending. That's when the letter came, not from the HOA, not from the family coalition. It came certified, state sealed, stamped by the Georgia Outdoor Conservation League. It was an offer, not to buy, to collaborate, a long-term access proposal that would allow limited wildlife research, school visits, and nature programs on a strictly regulated basis. Everything would remain under my ownership. I would retain all authority, no development, no public events, no political attachments, just conservation, protection, order. And in return, a yearly stipend from the state, generous enough to make every prior dispute look ridiculous. I read it 3 times before I smiled. Not because of the money, because of what it meant. The state had recognized my fight, had seen through the noise, the liens, the slogans. They saw the lake for what it was, private, preserved, intentional. I signed the contract that evening, not out of spite, out of relief. For the first time in nearly a year, I felt like I could breathe again. Word spread fast. The local news did a segment. Positive, respectful. Lisa and I were interviewed at the shoreline, her hand lightly brushing mine when she thought the camera wasn't rolling. The town responded quietly. Fewer glances in the grocery store, a few more nods at the gas station. The lake was no longer the battlefield. It was a landmark again, a place. And yet, one thread remained unresolved. Doug. After the failed court battle, after the fire attempt, after the hooded encounters, he had vanished. Not officially. His name still appeared on the HOA rolls. His car still registered to the address. But no one had seen him. No one had heard from him. His phone disconnected. His social media wiped. It was as if he had erased himself. I didn't miss him, but I didn't trust the silence either. And then, during the first conservation dinner hosted by the League at a small cafe on the other side of town, he returned indirectly. I was standing near the buffet table, half listening to a story from Jeff about raccoons stealing security wiring. When the front door opened, a tall man in a ball cap stepped inside. Quiet, watchful, thin. I didn't recognize him at first, but something about the posture felt familiar. He walked slowly, scanning the room. Then he spotted me, approached. Jake Porter, nodded cautiously. I'm Alan, Doug's brother. I didn't answer. He reached into his coat and pulled out a sealed envelope. He's not coming back. He said, he's sick. Not just mentally, cancer, advanced. I said nothing. He handed me the envelope. He asked me to give you this. Told me he owed you one honest thing in his life. Then he walked away. No explanation, no further words. I opened the envelope that night. Inside was a single photo, black and white, dated 2 years before I bought the property. It was me on a weekend visit, standing at the edge of the lake, hands in my pockets, surveying the land. In the corner of the image, barely visible through the trees, was Doug, watching. The caption on the back, handwritten in small block letters, said, he knew you'd come. He was ready long before you were. I sat with that for a long time. The war hadn't started with the yacht, or the fence, or the HOA. It had started long before that with obsession, with a man who saw a lake as power, and saw me as the intruder. But now he was gone, or going, and the lake, my lake, was finally still. Not empty, just still. Over the next few weeks, life returned to something resembling normal. Jeff took a part-time job guiding school groups around the conservation paths. Ari moved into the spare cabin and began building a wildlife observation journal. Lisa stayed, permanently, no title, no pressure. Just presence. We cooked together, laughed more, touched like people who understood what it meant to lose things and still remain. One night, sitting on the dock with a blanket around our shoulders, she asked me, "Do you ever regret it?" I shook my head. I regret what it took, but not what I protected. She looked out across the water. You know they'll come again, right? Someone, someday, people like Doug, with new names, new tactics. I know. I said, but next time, I won't be alone. She smiled, leaned her head against my shoulder. You never really were. That night, the lake looked different, not bigger, not brighter, but honest, earned, free. I stayed outside long after Lisa went to bed, watching the reflection of the moon bend over the ripples. I thought about the fish nailed to the dock, the smiling hooded figures, the threats, the tactics, the silence. And I knew something most people never understand until it's too late. Peace isn't the absence of noise. It's the refusal to surrender to it. At 2:16, the shoreline alarm triggered. My phone buzzed. I checked the feed. No movement, just static. A new glitch, a new signature. I stood, grabbed my jacket, and stepped outside. The fog had returned low, thick, hugging the lake like a secret. I walked to the dock, flashlight off, listening, nothing, stillness, but the feeling was back. That invisible weight, the sense that someone was watching, not to act, just to remind. I turned on the floodlight. The fog split. No boat, no figure, just water. And yet, I smiled, because the message wasn't fear anymore. It was a ritual, a reminder that I was still here, that the lake was still mine, that whatever came next, I had already faced worse and stayed standing. I turned off the light, walked back up the hill, and before I closed the door behind me, I whispered into the night, not as a warning, not as a challenge, but as a truth. No one takes one ripple without my permission.